It was called the Cartoon Crisis. A Danish newspaper published depictions of the Prophet Muhammad, and in doing so set off an international firestorm. That decision presented a test to the very nature of a free society and the ability to debate ideas without fear of persecution or violent repercussions. Like many European countries, Denmark's struggle with self-censorship created a difficult environment for freedom of speech and the free exchange of ideas. That challenge was no more apparent than in Denmark's newspapers.
There was a culture of kind of chilled speech in Europe. People were worried, they felt threatened if they spoke out on hot-button issues, whether politically incorrect issues or critical of Muslims committing blasphemy.
In this cauldron, journalist Flemming Rose was hired as the cultural editor for the prominent Jyllands-Posten newspaper. Rose had worked for years in Moscow as a newspaper correspondent, where he witnessed peaceful demonstrators in Lithuania slaughtered by the Red Army. His experience had shown him firsthand that bans on controversial, taboo, troublesome speech were simply incompatible with an open society. At Jyllands-Posten, Rose became aware of a children's book author struggling to find an illustrator for a book about the life of the Prophet Muhammad. For Rose, the dilemma epitomized the overreach of cultural and religious taboos influencing public speech.
You weren't allowed to draw Muhammad in a children's book about his life, that somehow you were going to be killed. And the insanity of that said you can't impose your belief. And also that as human beings, we have a right not only to not go along with your belief, but even to say, your belief is nuts.
Rose decided to invite Danish cartoonists and illustrators to draw the prophet as they saw him. He went further, pledging to publish all submissions. True to his word, Rose and Jyllands-Posten published 12 editorial cartoons under the title The Face of Muhammad. One cartoon depicted the prophet with a bomb for a turban.
As a Muslim, I should say, I don't like the prophet being mocked, or a cartoon that ridicules the prophet or God or other prophets, by the way, or Jesus or Moses or Mary, which are all very, sacred figures for Islam. But the real question is, okay, I don't like it and I find it something offensive. The real question is, how do I respond to something that is offensive?
A delegation of ambassadors from Muslim countries petitioned the Danish Prime Minister Rasmussen to condemn the cartoons and punish those responsible. Rasmussen refused, and frictions escalated. The crisis spread across the Middle East. A group of Danish imams declared their aim to internationalize the issue. An Egyptian cleric called for an international day of anger for God and his prophet.
I don't think Flemming or anyone else, at least no one else who is responsible and grown up, is saying go around every day and offend as many people as possible on purpose. I think we all believe in a form of engagement that's civil. But the truth is that we don't agree on a lot of stuff. And a lot of things that you may believe and deeply hold may be deeply offensive to me. You can state them civilly, we can all try to state them civilly, but if you try to suppress offensiveness or offendedness, then invariably what you do is put the most offended person in charge of deciding what the rest of us can say.
The ideal Muslim position in the face of anything that mocks or ridicules Islam would be to distance yourself from that, which would mean maybe you stop buying a newspaper if you find it offensive, or if you don't watch a TV program if you find it offensive, or you don't talk to certain people who are maybe offending your faith, which I call a civilized form of disapproval.
Within days, protesters set the Danish and Norwegian embassies in Syria ablaze. The Danish embassy in Lebanon was torched. Violent protests from Nigeria to Pakistan left 139 people dead. Rose and the cartoonists received death threats. Newspapers were closed in Russia and Malaysia. Authorities in Yemen and Jordan threw newspaper editors in jail. It might have seemed that the tensions over the cartoon crisis abated when last year publishers of the satirical magazine Charlie Hebdo reprinted the cartoons from nearly a decade before and added some of their own. Months later, attackers stormed into the offices of the magazine and killed 12, including the editor, Stéphane Charbonnier. Again, for publishing mere cartoons, journalists lost their lives, and Flemming Rose lost several friends.
One of the most moving things that we saw in France after the attacks on the magazine Charlie Hebdo was French people pouring into the streets to say, "We are all Charlie Hebdo." And that kind of demonstration of solidarity really sends a very powerful signal to the world.
No one would have guessed that the drawing of a dozen cartoons would have given rise to murder, attacks on embassies, these demonstrations all over the world. And I think that that's a great illustration of how powerful these forces of censorship are and how strongly we have to act against them.
Flemming Rose refused to go into hiding. Instead, he publicly explained his decision in The Tyranny of Silence, his own account of the controversy.
I think when Flemming Rose and his staff decided to publish those cartoons, they understood there was a risk involved. I don't think anyone understood the magnitude of what was going to happen as a result of that, though. And that's what was really such a wake-up call about this.
Again, in a way, what happened with the Danish cartoons was just a premonition that we still have to have free speech. We cannot have the assassin's veto.
Amid attacks, murder, repeated death threats, and even condemnation from people who should be standing up for freedom of speech, Rose has remained steadfast.
In a democracy, you have many rights. You have the right to free speech, freedom of religion, freedom of movement, freedom of assembly, the right to vote. But the only right you should not have in a democracy, and especially a multicultural democracy, is a right not to be offended. Because in a multicultural society, we are all very different. And this difference in terms of culture, ethnicity, and religion means that we also have very different ways to express ourselves.
In the face of a controversy that I think he never expected, he could have taken an easier way out. You know, he could be living a quiet life somewhere without controversy and, importantly, in more safety, more personal safety. And I just admire greatly the fact that he has put himself at great personal risk, recognizing the opportunity that he's been given to speak out in defense of these fundamental values of freedom of speech and freedom of expression.
It's called the first freedom, the freedom to test and debate ideas. It is the very catalyst for human development. Tonight, we celebrate Flemming Rose, a champion of liberal values and defender of free speech.